How's it going, everybody? My name's Antonio, and you're about to watch or listen to a conversation that is general and impersonal in nature, one that will include no financial nor professional advice of any sorts, but it will include a lot of forward-looking statements. There is a longer disclaimer on your screen right now. It's actually really a warning that you should be reading, so pause the screen and read that. And I recommend that you proceed with caution and do more research before taking any decisions whatsoever. That all said, I'm talking to Scott here from Snowline, so this is going to be an exciting interview. Scott, thank you for being here, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Antonio.
Pleasure is all mine, of course. I'm, as I said, I'm looking forward to this discussion. As Snowline has been a good case study for me to study. It's also been broadly talked about on Twitter in the last couple of months. There was even some controversy that I hope to address here, or at least some of that in here. But let's maybe start with a short 30-second or a minute overview of the company. What is Snowline Gold?
Yeah, Snowline is an exploration company. We're a gold focused exploration company, so we're out there trying to find the next big gold mine or gold mines. We're focused in the Yukon Territory in northwestern Canada, and we're focused on greenfield gold plays. So a lot of companies, there's a saying that the best place to look for a mine is in the head frame or in the shadow of a head frame, like near another old mine. But we're going out and testing brand new ideas because we know that there is a lot of untested territory here in the Yukon, and these are good rocks. So you can make good discoveries looking around a mine, but you can also make fantastic discoveries and find brand new things by looking at new ideas.
Okay, so new untested ideas. That's also something that we're gonna touch upon here in a second. But before we do that, though, Scott, you seem like a young guy. So for someone who doesn't know you all too well, one might wonder what makes this guy think that he's the best man to find this new big gold mine, this big piece of land. What would you say to that?
I guess I'm probably not the best guy doing it, but I am doing it, and so maybe that's a kind of default category that I come from a long history of exploring in the Yukon. My father's a prospector. He has been prospecting here in the Yukon since the 1980s, and I was born around then, and he's been dragging me out along with my older brother ever since. And so I grew up out there in remote parts of the Yukon, banging rocks, learning about mineralization, learning about prospecting, learning about how to explore. And so, it's really kind of in my blood, in my DNA. And Snowline comes directly out of that experience. It wasn't that I had that experience and I decided to launch a company. It was actually, working with the family. I went on to study geology. I went on to study business after learning that prospecting is kind of 50% geology and 50% business, or somewhere in there. And so in launching Snowline, really, I came back from university and I joined my dad in a more formal arrangement, and we ultimately had a private prospect generating company. Like, we were out there, as we touched on, generating new ideas, trying to find new things, and really the model was always just, then you sell it to a junior, you sell it to an explorer, a company like what Snowline is now. But it's been very tough to do that over the past decade, and so we tried to sell to juniors, we couldn't. We tried to sell to majors and just kind of skip that step altogether. Majors being big companies that have producing mines, and it's still just too early stage. And so ultimately, with the prospects we had on our hands, put together a slide deck for an imaginary company, and suddenly had investors coming in, and so and that's Snowline. So really, it's a continuation of 30 years of exploring in the Yukon, and I'm someone who knows these projects very well. I know the Yukon very well. I know how to explore here, and yeah, that's kind of how I've stumbled into this role.
I hate to disagree right off the bat, but when you say you're maybe not the best man to do this, I would probably put up the picture of you and your dad when you were like 5-6 years old in the Yukon. You've been there for 30 years. I mean, who's better to do this, right? So you're young, you're hungry, you have the education. You've also had at what, 35 something years old, you've got 30 years of experience. So not many people can say that. So That's sort of why I set that question up, because I thought it was quite interesting, and I thought it's a very cool backstory that you have that I think is worth sharing. So that's very cool. Yeah. You mentioned a few times that you're trying a new idea here, and your projects are often referred to as unexplored elephant country, I guess. Elephant country land or something like this. Basically land that's not being drilled and explored a lot before in recent history, at least. So the last couple of 100 years. I believe though that about based on what I found, about $20 million or so has been spent on exploring that so far. Not a lot, considering how big the land package is. But that still makes me think, though, how come? Like, how come nobody picked up those lands before? How come nobody went there poking? How come some people spend some money there, but they never went through with it? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think there are a lot of factors that contribute to that. And one is just that the Yukon is a big place, and there's a lot to explore here. You still see people making discoveries in places like Nevada, which has been looked over inch by inch over decades or centuries even, and yet you can still find new things there and apply new ideas. And yeah, that's another facet of this is that. People have been out on our claims before, what are now our claims before. Particularly, there's an area called Einarson, one of our projects, the northernmost project, and it was explored. It's basically unexplored, but there was a company out there in 1975 on one of our targets that's now a target for Carlin-style mineralization. This company came up to Einarson 1975. Or what would become Einarson, and explored just a small program for lead zinc mineralization. And they found a bit of it, but it wasn't enough to really move the needle. They didn't assay a single thing for gold. Then you fast forward 35 years, and we were out there poking around for Carlin-style mineralization, and that was really the next wave. And so it was really kind of this idea-focused thinking. And sure enough, we were out there as prospectors in 2008 looking for a Carlin, and then another company actually made the big discovery nearby, though. So that was really validating for our idea. A company called Attack Resources to the northwest of where we are made a discovery that grabbed a lot of attention globally, because this was the first really bona fide, yes, this is Carlin mineralization outside of Nevada. And of course, people have been searching for these deposits elsewhere for decades. And that really drove the next wave of exploration, at least on that northern project. But then the idea was Carlin, just like the folks exploring in 1975 were focused on lead zinc. The next wave was focused on gold, but focused on a specific type of gold. And so big quartz veins, like you see in orogenic systems, like you see in mines like Fosterville in Australia, or things like Newfoundland right now with companies like Newfound Gold. You wouldn't necessarily see mineralization like that in a Carlin system. And so if you're really focused on Carlin, you might walk right over that stuff. And so some of this last wave, when we had these optioned out, they ultimately found this mineralization, but not before kind of a huge wave of expenditures and exploration, which provides very valuable data for us. But it was when you're targeting one thing and too much on one thing, you can walk over some other really interesting things. And so we're not immune to that either. We're now coming back. Okay, we're thinking more broadly. This province looks like it hosts a whole range of gold deposits and potential for gold deposits. And so, we need to keep an open mind. And it's hard not to get too constrained by one model, even the discoveries we're making. And when we look over the hill to try to find the next one, and it looks a little different. Like, are we constraining our thinking too much by just trying to find what we found over here? Or do we take this other deposit for what it is? And I think that's a sort of a philosophical geological question that goes on, but it has real world implications, in that you can explore an area and explore it again and find new things with new concepts. But in this case, we really are exploring some very, very greenfield stuff, where we're walking up creeks and seeing outcrops that are just what we hope are tier 1 deposits sticking out of the ground. And it's like, wow, okay, this has never been staked before. Probably anyone with a prospector or an economic geologist would have staked this before. So if they had seen it, and so the sort of plausible conclusion there is that just nobody has ever walked up that creek before. And then so that brings about the last facet of this that I'll get into, or last angle, is that it is remote. And so we are exploring an area that's not really on the beaten path. That's always been a competitive angle for us as prospectors, to go where other people aren't. But it's not crazy remote. You see projects coming online that have been found in other parts of Canada, other parts of the world, that are far more remote than where we're exploring now. And looking at the rocks and looking at the anomalies that have come out of the data, it just seems like there's such, it's a high bar to clear out there, but the rocks have so much potential. And it looks like, we may be onto a few different targets that any one of them alone could clear that bar. So, we're very happy to be exploring out there, and very happy to have the chance to take this first crack at what could become a new mining district.
You mentioned a few of the topography things, like the creeks and all these other mountains, and especially the creeks. Like I believe there's one, like a river or something, that runs right through your project. Is it maybe possible that some of those could they cause you any problems, or would they be more of an advantage? Like how am I supposed to look at your topography based on also like how high you're up on hills or in a mountain, or again the creeks around them, next to them, stuff like that?
So before I jump right into that, I'll just point out that we have we're exploring a big area, and yes, we've made some discoveries, and I think we're zooming in on Valley there in particular, which I'm really excited to do for I think for obvious reasons, if you've seen the numbers there. But kind of zooming back out to the whole district that we're putting together, we have lots of targets and lots of different scenarios out there, and so some of them might have a geometry that's not conducive to easy extractions, others might, and every situation that we find out there is going to be different in terms of the target itself, and the extenuating circumstances. But in the case of Valley, we're actually extremely fortunate. You look at not just in the find, but in terms of where it is, and when you look at all these criteria for mineability of a deposit, the boxes that it's already ticking, we're thrilled. Speaking of the topography, it is in a valley. It's called Valley, but it's a glacial valley, and so river valleys are often just a big V. A glacial valley will be a U shape, and that just has to do with the dynamics of the fluids, the Newtonian ice pushing down and creating this this big broad valley. And so Valley is in this flat valley bottom, and so sometimes you find a deposit that's on a hill, and like to chase the mineralization one way, you're going to have to extract huge amounts of this hillside that are all just barren rock, and so you're just moving rock after rock after rock that or truckload after truckload after truckload that doesn't really do much to your bottom line except for getting you down to the mineralization. And so that's your strip ratio. A high strip ratio is bad, low strip ratio is good. Just the ratio of non-mineralized rock to mineralized rock as you're mining. And so Valley being in this valley bottom and having mineralization right from surface, right when we start digging, or whoever starts digging, they'll be able to dig into mineralized rock. And so you start paying back your CapEx, your capital expenditures to set up the mine right away. And so yeah, the strip ratio, the high grade near surface, the consistency present a lot of very nice projects. We can get into the metallurgy and other factors that are also just appear to be ticking the boxes or have the potential, or very likely to tick the boxes. But in reference to the creek you mentioned, that does flow right over basically our highest grade zone, and that's part of why we found it, because there is that creek cuts right through a canyon on the edge of the intrusion, and the prospector that walked up there, a guy named Shane Carlos, working for a company that we'd optioned it out to, he noticed, okay, these rocks are very interesting, took some samples, there's mineralization, you get into the intrusion, there's sheeted veins. His brother was up on the hill, up on the edge, and was grabbing these rock samples just off the shoulder of the intrusion, grading up to 152 grams. Really, I guess I get carried away with discovery stories, but they're fun. But the creek itself it would have to be redirected to do this, but it's not a huge stream. It's not a huge obstacle, especially if you consider the size of the prize. And there are actually some pretty interesting things that you might be able to do. We actually had a minister from the Yukon government who came out and was looking at the project and looked at the stream and looked at the canyon, and he said, you could probably pull an interesting amount of hydro, of watts out of here, maybe a megawatt or something. You'd have to do some actual studies to see what we could pull from it. But route around with a diversion, have a penstock potentially, and then just with that drop that you get through that canyon that's there now, you could actually generate probably enough power to power a camp out there. You need, of course, additional power to actually process some of the bigger operations, but yeah, it's it may be an advantage as opposed to just another bit of logistics to deal with when you're developing a mine.
How did that meeting go, by the way, with the government? Because I've been thinking about the local government, because I know that Yukon is generally pro mining, but given the size of your land package, now obviously you wouldn't make one mine of the whole land package, but even only the valley discovery is rather large. Like, do they want large open pit mines in the Yukon?
Well, I mean, there are large open pit mines in the Yukon, and there are large open pit mines that are moving ahead. You look at things like Eagle, Victoria Gold. They're really an economic driver of the Yukon right now with that project outside of the community of Mayo. And you look at other projects that are moving forward. Coffee is open pit. Casino is open pit, and when looking at Valley, I think one important thing to think about is, you say large open pit mine, but what does large mean? And this is gold only. It's multiple grams per ton, and so the grades here, like you look at the gold grades in something like Casino, or you can look at them at where a very small fraction of a gram, but there are copper and other things in there. But Casino is big, low grade, probably billions of tons. You look at Eagle and what they're moving rocks at an average grade of 0.6 or 0.65 grams per ton. When you get into multiple grams per ton, as we're seeing in these drill intersections, and of course this is early stage, but we don't actually have to move that much rock, and we could conceivably have a very large deposit from an ounces in the ground standpoint, but not actually have to dig that big of a hole to get that out. So it could be actually not modest, but not a super pit or anything like that, to potentially have one of the larger gold mines out there in the territory.
That's the local government that we were talking about. What about First Nations over there? What's the current situation with the Indigenous communities around Valley? But also talk to me maybe in general about your whole land package.
Yeah. Well, the First Nations in the Yukon, 11 of 14 have signed land claims agreements, and so they've sort of got a lot of what they own and what the government owns sort of squared away. But that's always an evolving situation, and there's a lot to consider in terms of traditional uses of the land and First Nations rights and so on. In our particular situation with Valley, and actually with most of our land holdings, were in the traditional territory of the First Nation of Notchinaik-Dun, and they're seated in the community of Mayo, which is about 200 kilometers to the west, and that's a community that was built around mining and has a long history of mining. And I think there are positive and negative aspects of that to be aware of. Of course, mining doesn't always have the best legacies, but it does have economic advantages and can build communities. And really, Mayo has seen it has seen a lot of mining, and it has seen mining go ahead recently. And you have active operations there with Victoria Gold. You have Alexco, recently bought out by Hecla, operating in that same area just immediately outside of Mayo. And so we've been very cognizant of that and trying to build as strong a relationship as we can. And really, we've tried to integrate community into the DNA of our company. I'm from the Yukon, born and raised here, and now raising a family here. And I genuinely want to build a company that's good for the territory. And so we've been very proactive in our outreach to the First Nations and trying to keep open lines of communication, trying to identify and operate within the framework of their concerns. And we've also looked to make sure that our work is beneficial, both in terms of information gathering, but also in terms of economic benefit, where we've partnered with quite a few companies that have that are owned by the Atanasov Development Corporation. And so, for example, we actually power our camp. Majority of its power, we do have a generator on site, but majority of the power comes from this big solar bank, which is these big solar panels can produce 27 kilowatts, and we're even able to run core saws off them with the battery bank there. So it's it's been great. Finding those places where we can collaborate and making sure that the work that we do has positive impacts on the communities and on the First Nations. So we're very cognizant of that. And then more broadly, some of our projects, especially a recent acquisition to the south of our main flagship area, go into the First Nation, the Ross River Crescat territory, and so that's another area where we're building ties and looking to basically just keep that same approach. We want to build something good for the territory, and of course that very much includes First Nations, and so that's on our radar, as well as two other projects down in the southwestern Yukon are in two different traditional territories as well. So we're being open and engaging proactively to make sure that there are no surprises there, and to make sure that we kind of know what's expected and what's hoped, and to identify opportunities where we can build things together.
But so far, it's looking like it should work for you moving forward, or like how am I supposed to look at their wishes or hopes for what you're doing there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, no red flags have come up from the consultations we've had from them. I guess I think that there's a process called land use planning in the Yukon that various First Nations would like to see move ahead more quickly. And that is moving ahead. And I think there are just capacity issues on both the First Nations and government side, I think, to make it happen at the speed that folks would like to see. But part of those land claims agreement, they specify that this land use plan will be decided for various traditional territories, and so that will come on someday, and we're hoping that the information that we gather will be very beneficial for that process, both in terms of identifying mineral potential, identifying species at risk, and just general wildlife populations. And so, we've been active in that front too, and documenting the wildlife that we see in building botanical inventories for our target areas, and even collecting seed banks again with the company owned by the First Nation of Atanasov. We essentially in 2 years now of building this company and engaging with the First Nation, there have been no major roadblocks, or no roadblocks at all in terms of moving things forward. So we hope we can continue to build that collaborative relationship. Of course, I can't speak for the First Nation, so I don't know, but I speak with them a lot, and things are going fine.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for saying that. It was something that you just said that reminded me of, or actually could be a good segue into you helping me figure out what your strategy might be going forward, because you said that you're trying to build a company that's going to be good for the community. What is the thing that you're trying to build? Like, would you personally prefer to find something big, sort of go big or go home, but find something, attract a major, and then sell the project within a reasonable period of time? Or would you yourself prefer to get this into production?
Really, and circling back to the conversation, my background, like I know how to explore, and the team that we've built around Snowline, I'm really proud of and really happy with. But it's a team that knows how to explore. We're explorers, we're not producers. And so should it come to it, should we find a fantastic asset that for whatever reason nobody else wants to develop, and the only way forward is for us to develop it, we'd have to make some serious changes to the company and figure it out. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to find something that is big enough to and rich enough to entice a major to come in, or otherwise a developer to come in and build it. And again, not just anyone. We're looking to build something beneficial here. So that company would have to echo our values in terms of we don't want to just do our part well and then hand it off to someone who comes in and just doesn't really worry about the communities or worry about the Yukon. So, that handoff has to be managed well in terms of aligning with our principles as a company. But that's the goal, is to build it up to something that will be attractive as a takeout target.
That's sort of what I assumed as well. And I've been thinking what an exit might look like, though. Do you think it's more likely to sell the whole company at once, or would you expect to be selling it project by project, just because of how big they are, I guess?
Yeah, and we didn't set up to become a prospect generator, which would be sort of what that model would be if we're just carving things out, selling this, make a discovery here, sell that. We've really acquired the position we have, just recognizing that there is a district there and going after it. So and also with the idea in mind that when a major comes in, they probably want to see some kind of a pipeline, and we're building something here quickly that may prove to be a kind of pipeline that companies could dig into for years and even decades to come, especially if they have a project out there that's producing gold. So that's essentially what we set out to do. But that said, we recognize that there's a lot of value, especially if this is a district. And so it would really depend on the specifics of an agreement. And I don't want to commit the company or the board to one path or the other, but it could be that there's a transaction that takes us out as initially planned. And of course, this is you gave the disclaimer for forward-looking statements. I think we're well down that rabbit hole now. But in the one path, we could have a company that comes in and just takes everything out, but the value would have to be there to match what we see as the potential and the risk in the rest of the claim package. And so another potential alternative would be putting those assets into some other vehicle, or otherwise arranging the structure of the transaction so that you basically have a sale, but then you still have the upside on the rest of the assets, in terms of continuing to explore and continuing to do what we do best, and continuing to reward shareholders with additional discoveries should they be there.
Right. And attracting that buyer, as you said, would likely need free. I guess you would have to keep on adding to what you've been doing so far, or keep delivering on what you've been delivering so far. One of the reasons being that you're far from infrastructure, as you said, you're off the beaten path quite a lot. So I guess it will take a lot more of what you've already reported to attract the attention of majors, right? Or maybe are there majors already calling you? Maybe after the last news release, is there something you can tell me there?
There's certainly attention. I think that our results here speak for themselves, and one thing that's worth noting about Valley, as opposed to other recent discoveries and other success stories and other transactions that have gone into majors, I'll bring up two in particular. One is Bruce Jack, Pretium's discovery in the Golden Triangle, very high grade gold, very rich underground system, but very complicated. And it really took that company, they made the discovery, and that wasn't enough. And so they got into feasibility, and then they ultimately built the mine and they started mining it. And it took that much to really prove out that, this is real, this works, the grades are here, the scale is here. And at that point, they were bought out by Newcrest just recently. Further, they're on the kind of difficult end of deposits in terms of what's easy to understand, what's difficult to understand. And that one, even to well-trained geological minds, that was a difficult one to understand, and it took a long time to really prove it. Kind of a little closer on that spectrum to the easy side is Dixie, which was the flagship asset of Great Bear, who were bought by Kinross for a substantial amount of money recently as well in the past few years. And but even there, they were taken out pre-resource, so that's unusual. Usually you go and you at least drill out what you have to some extent. It may be open, but you have not proven, you actually inferred in this case, or at least you'd start with an inferred resource and build it up with more confidence as you get denser holes. And usually that's kind of a baseline of you want to have some piece of paper showing, okay, we think we have this, and we have an independent person signing off on that, having looked at the data and meeting these criteria. But in their case, the potential was enticing enough that that they had interest from several majors, and they were ultimately taken out before putting out a resource. And so they were kind of halfway through a drill program to a resource. I think they drilled north of 300,000 meters, which is a lot. 300 kilometers of drilling, and they were really only halfway there. So they were taken out at that point, which is fantastic. But the company that bought them, Kinross, they immediately turned around and drilled another 300,000 or 400,000 meters, and they're still in that process now. And I think the initial resource estimate for that deposit is expected later this year. And so so you can see that if the writing is on the wall, if the deposit is a little simpler, it can be taken out at earlier stages. And then I think way further over on that spectrum, you have Valley. And again, this is one of the things we're very, very fortunate about. Valley is not a structurally hosted thing. It's not a structurally controlled thing, at least not to the extent that those other systems are. Valley is what's called a bulk tonnage target. And so the gold is really there, sort of like a big cloud underground. We have these veins that are cutting through this intrusion. They're centimeter scale veins, anywhere from a couple of millimeters to like 20 plus centimeters, generally around a centimeter. But there are thousands of them, and they run for hundreds of meters in length. We're seeing them across hundreds of meters of width, and we're seeing them down to depths of well over 500 meters. So, and so it really comes down to grade continuity and scale, and of course what those grades actually are. And so in the drilling that we've done so far, we have a ton of momentum, and that's really, if you step back and look at, I think it was figure 2 in our last release, which was sometime last week. You can see what we have back for holes. Last year, we drilled 4 holes in the edge of the intrusion, and then we've since stepped out into the intrusion. We have results back for 3.7 holes so far, and we've drilled a lot more. So we're still waiting on results for 91% of our field program this year in terms of our drilling. And as those come together, well, in the little bit that we've seen so far, we are seeing good grades. We're seeing great continuity both within and between holes, and then in the holes that that 91% of holes that we're still waiting for, we see visuals that are very similar to the holes that we've seen so far that suggest that this system is bigger and has that scale. And so we think that as the results come in through from now to through the next months, that it'll paint a very clear picture of what's there. And so the attention, will come, and we're basically having those conversations internally a lot earlier than you might as a company, because we don't necessarily see that multi-year runway ahead of us. Of course, we're planning for it and strategizing for it, but we're also looking at it could well be that by March there's a very clear picture. We won't have a resource out. We won't have like a even to the inferred category. Like, this would be pretty basic still based on the drill spacings we've done. But when you see, if we see continuity between some of the bigger holes, then suddenly on the back of a lot of envelopes, including ours, internal working models will start to show up. And again, the characteristics of this bulk tonnage system just make it that much easier to understand than a Dixie or a Pretium system. And so Bruce Jack. And so, yeah, I think that it's something that we're going to be at that stage that Great Bear got to with Dixie after 300,000 meters of drilling. We could conceivably be there with 15,000 meters of drilling.
I guess that's why people are so excited about this. And this also brings me to the price. Do you remember how much Kinross paid for that project at the time?
Yeah, I think it was around 1.8 billion. So it's a pretty healthy figure. And of course, we don't know for how much exactly, but there's a lot of speculation circling around the sort of 8 million ounce number, but that remains to be seen.
Right. So they paid that much after that much drilling. Basically, they bought that many drill meters, if you want to look at it that way. You've drilled some, 8,000 meters on the project so far, or am I off?
Yeah, we've drilled more. Let's see, we'll have drilled around 13,000 meters we have. Of course, don't have assays back for the vast majority of that.
Right. So you're waiting on assays. You've not done any metallurgical work, if I'm not mistaken yet. Yet the company's trading at almost $400 million as we speak. So for you to sort of, get a meaningful premium for shareholders that is as exciting as people might expect it to be, you would have to pull something like Great Bear or potentially bigger because of the geographical difference, right? Being remote and stuff that we've discussed throughout this conversation. But do you think that's reasonably achievable? And I guess you would say yes, but maybe then we could also talk about the timeline under which you would like for that to happen. And again, obviously forward-looking statements, we don't know if it's actually going to happen, but how quick would you like for it to happen?
Well, I mean, if we could have all our assays back tomorrow and have a clear picture of what's there, that would be optimal, I suppose. But ultimately, and as I was alluding to before, you're right. I do think that it has that kind of scale potential just based on what we've seen so far. Of course, we need to wait for the assays to know that for sure, or to know that at all. But the indicators we have suggest that this could be a very substantial gold system. And the way that, we basically built to our present market cap just on the visual results. And that kind of the way that they come together, just reporting vein densities of these sheeted quartz veins I described, reporting instances of visible gold where we see trace bits of gold in these veins, obviously a decent indicator for the presence absence of gold. And so based on that, we've kind of maybe prematurely got to our market cap, but then we've since released 1.7 holes or a few holes from this higher density zone, which has the scale to build something pretty special, and we haven't built on that market cap, so that's interesting to see. I guess people were pricing in that discovery, but I think that the market has sort of treated these holes as though they're shots down the guts of a system. I mean, you see that all the time. A company comes out with one really good hole, and the stock goes kind of nuts, and then they release other holes, and you see, okay, they just drilled right down this thing, and now it's clear that that's not going to hold together, and the stock comes back down. So in a way, it's almost could be a positive sign that that we've drilled these holes, which really validate what we're looking at out there, and the stock hasn't gone crazy. Because I think if we continue to get these kind of results, then this system will build, and that back of envelope potential will be there. So, I think that the upside is certainly there for putting something big onto the table. And then in comparing where we are to where Dixie is located, obviously they had this was in Ontario. They had roads, highways and power lines and stuff nearby, and that does make it very attractive for actual development purposes. But that bar is only so high. Like, yes, we're remote, but once you get a big enough deposit to clear those hurdles of bringing in access, bringing in power, then anything on top of that is basically bonus. And so if we can build a system, and maybe it's not maybe you don't need what Great Bear had to get to that scale. Actually, you probably wouldn't need to get to what Great Bear had to or we'll see what they have. We still don't have that resource out, of course, to get to that scale. And then anything on top of that is, it's as good as next to a power or a power line and a highway, because it is next to a power line and a highway, because the other ounces have built that power line and highway. So when you start to look at big deposits, if you're discounting the entire deposit at $1 per ounce basis, because like this one had power and water and road access, and this one doesn't, if you're discounting the entirety of this deposit, all those ounces, you shouldn't be, because only some of those ounces get discounted to account for that infrastructure development. So anyway, that's part of what we're thinking here. And one of the reasons that we think that this has a lot of upside.
I'm happy that you're sort of mentioning other stories, because it's easier for me to understand the value behind the company if I compare it to other things that have already happened or are playing out as we speak. I know you often compare yourself to what you have to what Fort Knox had before it became the mine that it is today, though it was a much better mine before what it was today, but that's another story. Are you aware of another story up in Alaska? It is Australian listed, but it's called Nova Gold. How do you compare to them in terms of and this is, by the way, this comes from my friend Fukashin. He's an analyst from the Independent Speculator.
Mm-hmm.
They're much cheaper in terms of market cap, if I'm not mistaken. They're in a much further stage, though. There's a lot more known about their project. So a lot of the things that you said today, like, hey, this is forward-looking statements, we didn't know that, we got to get the assays back, we got to do metallurgical and all that.
Mm-hmm.
They've done a lot of that work already, and to my unexperienced eye, it seems like there's a lot of similarities between your projects.
Mm-hmm.
Besides them, they're, I guess, maybe in a better position in terms of infrastructure. But again, you've discussed that already. So have you studied that story, how they've executed it, as well as their geology? And is there anything that you can take away from that story or tell me about here?
Yeah, I mean, I can't claim to be an expert on what they're doing, but it's it's certainly on my radar to an extent. I think that again, it just comes back to the fundamentals of what we're seeing at Valley that really drive the value behind that story in terms of the scale, in terms of the continuity, and in terms of just the mineability, infrastructure aside, as we've discussed, but just the geometry, the placement, the high grade near surface, and that sort of a thing. So it just ticks so many boxes. And even the metallurgy, we don't have the network back yet. We've actually we're just initiating that process right now, but we should have a clear picture of the metallurgy in a few months' time. But looking at analogs like Fort Knox, and looking at analogs like Eagle and other even early stage projects of this type that have done the network, there really aren't that many nasty surprises. And based on what we're seeing visually, we expect to have a pretty similar setup to that. So, I think that's really what's carrying the value that we have here, in addition to the district potential, and that we have secured a huge area. But I really think that at the moment that a lot of our market cap is carried just on the shoulders of Valley, of course.
Okay. That's interesting there. I also wrote something else about because you were mentioning what you're seeing at Valley, and I was looking at the map as you were speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like the vein density weakens when you step out of the valley intrusion, so out of essentially that red blob on a map here. What does that mean? Like the fact that the vein density weakens when you step out from the valley intrusion, or when you go further away from that last hole that you reported, the vein density sort of weakens. What does that really mean?
Well, it probably means that there are lower grades there, and because the vein densities are a strong control as to what the grades will ultimately be. There are some nuances in there, like when you look at drill hole angles, and in some cases we're going to be cutting right through, or not quite orthogonal because these things are vertical, but we're cutting them at a good angle. In other cases, the veins kind of change, and so you're going to be drilling through closer to parallel, and so a vein density just measured by veins per meter is going to drop, even if you're drilling through the same density of veins. But I don't think that's the case. I do think that for a good chunk of the intrusion, you're just in lower densities from what we've seen in the drilling so far. But still, there's this zone or corridor in the southwest side of the intrusion, which also happens to be in the middle of this big broad flat valley, so that works out well, where we are seeing the higher densities. And just within that zone, even if you write off everything else as being 0 grams per ton, we're still seeing the potential for big for really a tier 1 asset in terms of the scale that we built out in that higher density core, and the grades that we're seeing in these drill holes that have come back. But and then going out in the Hornfells, we have seen grades go out for tens of meters, maybe 100 meters out. Not they drop off as you get away from the intrusion. It is a system that's built by the intrusion and mostly within the intrusion. So I don't know what's going to come of the lower densities. We have some holes drilled out there so far. Hole 6 is the lone hole to come back, where we drilled kind of in the other direction and ended up drilling away from this high density trend, and that averaged about 0.2 grams per ton over the length of the hole, which was 300 or 330 meters. And so if that's the story, then that's not you can still build ounces that way. And if you look at something like Fort Knox with their capex paid off, their cutoff grade is now 0.1. So potentially those are ounces that you're actually putting into investors' pockets someday. But at the moment, I think the real story is that high density zone that we're getting into, and there's plenty there to build things out. And but I am really curious to see what comes out of holes like 8 and 12, and even some of the more distal shots where there is we do see veins, we do see bits of VG in places, and so like to see how that hangs together on a large scale will be interesting, and we could be pleasantly surprised.
Something that a geologist told me that I recently interviewed was that sometimes where you don't see gold also tells you a lot about where the gold might be, if that makes any sense, if I'm summing it correctly. And talking about expectations might be a good segue to, like, we sort of we cannot really talk about expectations without addressing the expectations of some of your larger shareholders who might be even more excited than you are on this project, and they've been expressing that openly. And I'm talking about specifically about Crescat's Dr. Quinton Henney, who's he famously said that you have the largest discovery in North America ever, and I sincerely hope you do. He sort of stuck a number to it, though, that was rather controversial. I know that you've already spoken to this, but how do you feel, and what do you think about such projections? Do you think they might hurt you from the perspective of share price? I mean, even if you come up with something very, very good from now on, wouldn't the market judge you based on that, what is it, 50 million ounce or something projection, and expect you to deliver nothing short from it, and therefore penalize you if you do deliver something short from it, even if it's something very huge like 20 million ounces? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really comment on the numbers themselves, but you don't want to set expectations too high and then disappoint with something that's still very fantastic. But I mean, I think that we're still at a place market cap wise where there's a lot of blue sky here for just sticking to the grindstone and putting out something, even if it disappoints relative to those numbers, that could still be pretty special and still offer shareholders a very handsome reward.
I did notice that the news release sort of went silent for some 12 weeks, 13 weeks between the time you sent hole 10 to the lab and getting the results back. And sure, I understand that it takes a while to get the results back. Especially, I recently learned that if it's higher grade, that could be, those appear to be tougher to sort and then assay or something along those lines. But I don't know. I'm just sort of guessing here. But why did you go silent? Like, did it have something to do with the increased attention and a little bit of controversy that was happening at the time, or was there just really nothing much to share?
It didn't have to do with any of that attention. It really, we came down to not having results back to share, and then it was kind of a two-pronged thing where the tail end of our exploration season kept us very busy, and attention on the company has kept us very busy as well. And so really kind of keeping our nose to the grindstone, trying to build the company, trying to build value, does take a lot of time as to releases. But in this case, it's just waiting for assays, and that's that was the story last year, and we thought that it was going to be different. It's obviously very similar this year, even potentially worse than we saw last year. And so we would have loved to have those assays back in hand to make some key targeting decisions later in the year, but we didn't. Fortunately, we are very lucky in this kind of system to have the visible gold, to have those vein densities and things like that to help guide our decision making out there. But really it's qualitative data at that point. And so, not as good as the quantitative. So it would have been great to have assays back a little sooner, but we are where we are. And we expect assays to continue to trickle in. And this is the silver lining to it, I suppose, is that we end up as a seasonal company with news flow. Not that we want people just jumping in and out of the stock. Of course, we prefer longer term investors who see the big picture here. But the reality is that there are a lot of people who invest in the stock for a quick profit, and this gives news flow for longer. So we would rather have information, but at the end of the day, now that things are kind of a little quieter in the field for the off season, or a lot quieter in the field, it gives us kind of something to look forward to, and continuing to build our story.
I think you put it nicely, because you said that some people invest in the stock, and I'm probably going to make somebody puke by being a big old cliche, but you're supposed to invest in the company, and a lot of people invest in the stock for the move in the stock price. And by the way, for the record, I have no reason to suck up to you. This is not a paid interview. I don't charge for these interviews. I missed the run up on Snowline because I was not a shareholder. I'm still not. I haven't pulled the trigger, so I have no reason to suck up to you. But I actually see it the opposite, and I don't understand why the market sees it that way. But sometimes people talk about like, oh, they haven't been releasing news for like 10, 12 weeks. They're probably not doing anything. I'm seeing it as the exact opposite, as to they're probably doing a whole lot more important things than sitting at home and writing news release about, hey, today we saw this rock on the property or something along those lines. Then again, you have to have trust in the team, I guess, to know that they're working on your dime, I guess, as a shareholder. So that maybe makes sense. But that aside, you're a few times you mentioned that you're waiting for some assays as we speak, quite a lot too. And again, it takes a while to get those back. So maybe you can sort of remind me about exactly what you're waiting for, and share your expected timeline as to when those assays might come back.
Yeah, and just to touch on your earlier point, I think that there's definitely a balance to be struck there between messaging and we went silent, and there is a material impact to that. So we have to be cognizant of that in terms of how we tell our story and that sort of thing. There are news releases that are material, and you just have to get that information out there. But when it comes down to like, okay, we on our like third level project over here, we found a soil anomaly and that kind of thing, or like you say, we're sharing this photo. We do need to be cognizant of that messaging. We are, and I think our Stephanie Hansen, our social media and IR manager, has done a fantastic job in helping us tell our story, helping us engage with shareholders, maybe not through news releases, but through social media and that sort of thing. So yeah, we're definitely cognizant of the need to kind of keep those embers burning. And yeah, there are times when we just get bogged down because we are only so many people and we are trying to do a lot. But other times, yeah, we basically have to put news out because you have to, because it's material information that you don't want to just sit on. You can't just sit on. Let
me maybe interrupt here, because I'm getting a thought, and that doesn't happen too often with me. So what do you really need to even worry about the share price right now? Because you're cashed up, and I'm probably going to ask about that sort of in a few minutes, but you're cashed up. You probably, I'm assuming you don't necessarily have to raise money right away, and your share price is doing better than most companies out there, definitely in the gold space. And your goal is not to sell out your shares all of a sudden at 500 million. You want to go big or go home. As you said earlier, want to sell the company for hopefully a larger amount of money. So why did you expand your marketing team? Like, why do you have to worry about the communication instead of just, when you get an assay back, even if it's 20 weeks in between, just report whatever is material and leave it at that? So why are you focusing on that side?
Yeah, well, I think there are a few important reasons, and Stephanie's with us full time, and actually she came from a marketing background, and we actually sent her into the field to go do work in the industry, so she kind of understood better what we're doing instead of just someone comes over and talks about the story. She owns the story, she knows the story, she's a part of the story now, and I think that's part of what's important is is just those genuine, open communication with shareholders. And yes, we're in a strong position. We're very fortunate to have a strong treasury, a nice runway, and easily definable objectives along that runway. And so we're in a good position there. But nonetheless, if we totally take our mind off the share price, and yeah, we're very lucky that it's very muted compared to how it is for most companies when you're living and dying by that, and you're trying to do your next raise, and of course you don't want to dilute. But we're in a position where we can run for potentially years with what we have. But nonetheless, if the share price languishes, if we're not communicating the story to investors, we're not going to be. Say you were a Snowline shareholder, and I don't know, you bought in at $2 or something, and you see that they're on the path for something great, and chugging along, and you go and check your portfolio, and we're trading at 70 cents because we haven't really stoked the fire in a while, then you're probably not going to be too happy with your $2 investment, and it's going to make it a lot harder for you to kind of hold the fort and look at that big picture. And so, I'm not saying that we're not going to go down or up, or I have no idea where the stock's heading, of course. But that said, if we can, if it's in our control, and it really isn't, but parts of it are, and I think that messaging, that communication, and trying to keep our investors informed of what we're doing will make us that much stronger as we go along. So that's kind of the incentive there. And we're not, I'm a geologist, and I think geologists, especially when they're managing junior companies, get criticized a lot for being way too like dollars into the ground, and like marketing doesn't matter, the rocks will tell the story. And I admit that's who I am. Like that's what I see. And even just I really don't like paying for things and when it comes to media, but I recognize the importance of getting our story out there. And so I am very appreciative that you would drag me on and take the time to actually listen to me for an hour, which is fantastic. Most people get sick of me long before that, so thank you. I do see the value, and so we are putting in that effort to get our story out there. You can find the best deposit in the world, but if no one knows about it, you're still going to be raising a horrible share price. At the same time, if you over promote, then you're going to run into the traps that you were talking about earlier, where people's expectations are too high, and potentially you're even just like stepping into a whole different world where you're just promoting nothing. And so we really try to let our rocks do the talking. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the infrastructure is there, the megaphone is there, so those rocks can actually be heard by people.
I really like that. And then when you said that you don't like paying for things, that resonated with me big time. I like your answer there. I agree with what you said, and that's why I asked, because I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on this, because different people have different views on that. I also talked to a lot of promotional companies that are there to simply promote and are spending too much money on that. So most of the times I would talk about them doing too much and not too little. So I'm happy that we've talked about that. But yeah, back to the assays. That's sort of where we left off the important discussions. What are you waiting on? When do we see that?
Yeah, we're waiting on 91% of the holes that we've drilled this year, or the meters that we've drilled this year. Including still the bottom third of hole 7, which was a barn burner hole right from surface down to 283 meters, and then just silence. And I think that just comes from the way that things were backlogged in the core yard, and then we shipped things kind of as they were ready, and so some of the holes are going to be kind of chopped up a little bit, and then as they were brought in, they're kind of brought in out of sequence. So we're still missing hole 8. In between, just temporally in between 7 and 10, obviously, and so yeah, bottom 7, hole 8, hole 9 was canceled and steepened to become hole 11. But then we got hole 10 back, which was random but very welcomed, because it's obviously another fantastic hole. And then going forward from there, we're still waiting for a lot of holes up to hole 33 at Valley, and then we drilled 5 holes at Gracie, and which is another intrusion similar to Valley. It doesn't daylight though, and so we have to find it. And so that was the objective or one of the objectives of this program, was to find it or gather information towards it. We're already in a good geological anomaly there, geochemical anomaly. And so our fingers are crossed that maybe we'll see something really interesting in the Hornfels. We did see veins that are parallel to the veins at Valley. So formed in a similar stress regime, which suggests similar timing to the emplacement of the Valley, which suggests a very strong genetic relationship between the two intrusions, the one that formed Valley and the one that formed Gracie. And so, and then we've seen visible gold in 4 of the 5 holes that we drilled, and the 5th hole being one that it was hole number 3, I believe, that actually, no, sorry, that was hole number 2 that we drilled down about 100 meters in really tough drilling, and the rocks weren't what we wanted to see, and ultimately decided to call that hole and get into more productive areas. But yeah, so 4 of the 4 holes that we really met our objective of in terms of meterage, those were, yeah, all 4 of them had VG in them. So that's pretty rare to do that at all, to find VG in any one of the 4 on a brand new prospect phase 1 drill program. We've now done it kind of 3 for 3 for our projects, so we're pretty excited by that. But then I'm not trying to dodge your question, maybe I am, but I'll answer it anyway, about just timing of the remaining assays. And really, it's just that we don't know. We do get estimates from the lab, and we appreciate those very much. They're not always accurate. There are there are factors that complicate those timelines, and so I've kind of stopped repeating those because I don't want to mislead people. And so we expect to have assays back in a matter of weeks, and we expect to have assays back in a matter of months, and everywhere in between. Just for comparison, whether or not this year is the same. Last year we drilled the very first holes at Valley in September, and we got those assays back in late January and early February or mid-February. So looking at that kind of a window, and then looking at, we drilled our last holes here in October, and what's that? Yeah, so potentially March, but really don't know when we're going to get the last assays back. But between now and then, again, as I mentioned, the silver lining in the whole story is this story will continue to grow and unfold. And hopefully, if we continue to hit intersections like hole 7 and hole 10 in some of these other key holes, then that resource, not a compliant resource, but that that idea of what's there will really start to materialize, and we'll really see what we're onto in that system, and so will the world.
What happens in between? Do you think we're going to see news this time, and what are you doing in between? Because I also saw that you've been picking up some ground. Will you do more of that going forward, or yeah, so talk to me about what happens in between.
Yeah, so it's not like we're waiting until March and we're going to have a big dump of all of our assays. So we'll have assays going out, more or less as they come in, and we're obliged to do that. But yeah, we are working on various initiatives on a bunch of different fronts, and one thing that we haven't really been communicating super well is that we have been exploring this whole area. And the new areas that we've acquired and other things very holistically. Like, we're not just Valley, even though the news flow has been dominated by those drill intercepts. We've been very active on all 7 of the projects that we started the season with, and we're trying to move those as a pipeline, as an exploration pipeline. Move prospects on those projects up or out of our development pyramid, and getting a lot of them to a drill ready stage, and so that we can hopefully continue to kind of roll through and continue to make discoveries. And so as we get other targets sort of online, I think that there's a lot of decent news flow to come out of that as well. And then if we do pursue any other land acquisition or that sort of thing, of course there's always that avenue, but yeah, right now we've done a lot of work that has been more or less behind the scenes, and we may find that there are material discoveries made just in that prospecting work that we've done. So a lot of that also depends on assays.
Sure, you're still sort of walking the property, looking for other things around around your projects, basically. It'd also be interesting to see, as you're announcing these assays, if other companies are going to start coming in to the region and start picking up ground close to you, because you see that happening a lot in other places where companies have discoveries. So that'd be interesting to watch. Yeah, well, so that's what you're doing in between. What about next year? Maybe you can give me the when, what, how, and how much of your of what you're planning on doing next year.
As a baseline, we're looking to do what we did this year. And actually a little more, because we kind of ramped up through the season. We started with one drill, quickly brought in a second, and then brought in a third sort of midway through after we had done a capital raise mid-season. And so as baseline, well, we have all those drills winterized and parked out there on site, and so we're looking to turn all three back on and continue to explore. And the proportion between, what do we drill at Valley, what do we drill at Gracie, what do we drill on other targets, Jupiter to the north, and other things, depends a lot on the assays that we get in the coming weeks and months. But we do want to be cognizant of striking that balance between recognizing when we've made a world-class discovery and giving it the attention it deserves, but also not getting so far into the weeds on something like that we don't look over the fence. We've proven through our work the idea that we launched the company around, that there's this fertile, high potential gold district out there, and so we almost didn't drill Valley last year because of the results we were getting from Jupiter, and we don't want to make that mistake. So we do want to dedicate some of that drilling onto other targets, as I mentioned, and continue to build this pipeline of projects, and hopefully to continue to build value through discovery. And so, the exact nuts and bolts of what next season is going to look like are still in the air, and still pending all those results coming back, being interpreted by our team, a lot of good meetings with the team to come, and really putting in the details of that strategy. But yeah, broad brush, it's baseline what we did this year, exceeding what we did this year with 3 drills going the whole time, and potentially scaling up. That's we certainly have the resources and the targets on hand to do that. How much or if we do it at all will depend on what comes out of the pipes in these next weeks and months.
When I said how much, I was also referring to how much you might be looking to spend. So this also might be a good point to bring in inflation, because that's something we should be talking about for sure. Mm-hmm. How much did you spend this year, in the general sense? You don't have to be exact, on the sense, but how much did you spend this year, and how much inflation are you accounting for going into next year?
Yeah, we're looking at probably once the dust settles here, about a $12 million exploration bill on our season. And again, we did extensive surface work kind of across our whole project portfolio, in addition to the drilling. And in total, I think we drilled 14,500 meters. And then inflation is on our mind. Obviously the key numbers giving rates in the kind of 8 to 10% range, and if those numbers can be are genuinely reflective of what's actually going on out there. So we are procuring material that we can now, since we do have the money. Anything that's not perishable, we're already starting to look at least for that base case scenario, like what do we need, and getting that together. But even if inflation is running, call it 10%, then we should still be in a good place to put together a $15 million program or something like that next year, and get more out of it than we did this year, if not more. And that's pending both our results, and I should also mention broader conditions and so on. If we see that we're gonna have to weather a long storm or something to that effect, we're cognizant of those factors too. But we're in a good place with being able to fight inflation to some extent, or at least explore in spite of inflation. And then looking at other ways to potentially deploy capital that would be better than just losing value.
Exactly. I'm hearing from some explorers though that they're expecting 30-40% higher costs. So that's kind of concerning in some cases. So you're talking about 12 million this year. How much do you have in the treasury right now? Are you at liberty to tell me the amount?
Yeah, I don't have today's exact figure in mind. We started the month with 27 million. And I'm thinking that when the dust settles, we'll and a GNA the fall with our bigger team that will probably be in the range of about 25 million when all said and done in the calendar year, hopefully north of that. And then we do have a strong warrant position, which I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but the warrants are held in large part by some very strong shareholders, and that's to the tune of close to $20 million. So and those are all on the money. So potentially more funds coming online.
So I mean, this answers it, but there's no necessity for raising money, I guess, at this point. Even though I don't expect you would have issues with that, even if you had to. So, yeah. What do you? I guess to sort of wrap it up here, because I'm sorry for going off for so long, but it's an interesting story. There's a lot of questions to ask the first time. What do you think could go wrong? What keeps you awake at night in terms of I guess financials mostly covered, but about in terms of a geological risk or something along those lines? What do you think can happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. First, thanks for giving me so much time. I'm really happy to have this conversation and be able to just sit down and talk about the company. But risks, I mean, geological risk is certainly one, and we see these visuals and we see the correlations, and we have good reason to believe in them, or to just based on, okay, we see this here, and the grade is this. We see this here, the grade is this. Correlation between density and grade is starting to take shape. It's not 1-to-1, and then, but nonetheless, it gives us a high degree of confidence that a lot of these other high density holes, especially since they have VG in them, are going to come back with some pretty strong numbers. But that said, we don't know that, and so that's obviously still a risk. We need the assays back before we can start to piece together that bigger picture, at least with a more degree of certainty. And I think that a lot of people on the sidelines are thinking the same thing and waiting and watching that to see if this cloud really does take shape, or if somehow. I really don't see how that would be the case. If you even look at the core photos we released, where we're cross-cutting the system, it's a big, broad system. So, I don't think that's I guess it's not necessarily keeping me awake at night, but it's certainly a big risk. And then, I think the other is just operating in the modern world, and being sure that we can build a company that has that social license to do things, and that we're, and so that just comes down to holding ourselves to a high standard, being proactive, engaging where we can, building strong connections where we can, and just trying to make things work. And I think that we've done a reasonable job there so far, but we're certainly not resting on our laurels, and are working hard to make sure that this is a viable operation in terms of license to operate. And like I say, if we're ever so lucky to sell the assets, we want to make sure that the company we do sell it to operates with the same integrity, or and has that same kind of view on things.
I did know, this might be a bit more specific, but I did notice though that and why I'm bringing this up sort of out of the blues, because otherwise I'm going to forget it. But I did notice that you mentioned the true width as unknown yet. What should I be imagining there? Could this be a risk? Could this surprise to the downside? And how do you look at it?
Yeah, that it's tricky to determine the true width of an intersection when you're drilling through a sheeted vein system, especially if the veins kind of change orientation. And it does look like they do that in valley. So, if you're dealing with a tabular body, whether it's a vein or whether it's like a replacement of some stratigraphic horizon, then it's pretty easy. Say it's vertical and you drill through it here, it's a little bit of trigonometry to figure out, okay, that this angle when you entered hits here and the angle on your left is there, distance is there, those angles are the same, you rotate it up, and a quick trig calculation gives you the true thickness. In this case, you're drilling through a big cloud, and if you just picture a cloud, you can have parts of the cloud with more water, parts of it with less water, parts of it you can kind of see through, parts you can't. And so when you drill through that, talking about the true thickness is trickier, because and especially here where the vein orientations, as I mentioned, change. In one case, you might be drilling through them at this angle, and at another, they're closer to the core axis, and so the true width changes depending on where you are. but also if it depends on, what you're calling I guess, you might have a high grade zone that has one orientation. You might have a medium grade zone that has a different orientation, and a low grade halo outside of this that has a different orientation. Or maybe they're the same orientations, but the thicknesses are different, and the way they kind of express themselves geometrically are different. And so, defining, okay, what's the true thickness of that thing you just drilled through? That's tricky. But as far as risk there goes, I think it's important to look at the cross sections that we put out, and you can see them in our news releases. And we are in the process of updating our website, and that comes down to the nose to the grindstone that that you're talking about. Where, but anyway, getting down a rabbit hole there. If you look at the sections through the news releases, you can see there's always a section in our press release. But if you want to compile a bunch of them, just looking through the last two releases from Valley, and you'll see various sections there. And of course, as we've talked about a lot, we need to wait for the assays. But if you look at the vein densities, then you can start to get an idea of, okay, what might this big cloud of higher density stuff be doing? And so you look and you can see in a hole like 7, you can look up and you see hole 14 at surface, and you see, okay, well, there's the cloud of mineralization at surface. And you look down at 15 and you're way down, like more than 400 meters below surface, and there's the cloud of mineralization down there, like vertically below it. So there you can start to see a zone that's maybe like locally on that section, maybe 200 meters wide horizontally. And again, the edges of that zone are really hard to define because it's just grade continuity dropping off, and or not continuity, but grades dropping off. And yeah, maybe it's wider if you factor in like a shell of a gram per ton instead of 2 grams per ton, or whatever you want to call it. And then you look at the section that has from our latest release that has hole 10, hole 29, hole 33, and there you can see it's even wider. It looks like it might be like 29. Actually, 10 stayed in mineralization a lot longer than we thought it was going to, and 29 got into mineralization a lot earlier than we thought it was going to, based on that cross section at 7. And so there you look down at the scale bar, and you can see this zone might be 400 meters wide. Like it's again, it's assay dependent, but there's a lot of width there. And so yeah, we could be in a zone, especially since hole 10 starts with mineralization right at surface. We started in the zone. So those widths downhole are certainly, you're drilling across part of it because you're getting a depth vector in your in that number, but you're also getting a width vector. And but just looking at the sections is the best way to get a sense of the width. And then just while I'm on that topic, a bit of a tangent, but that hole 33 in that hole 29 and hole 10 section, and it says it on the figure, but you can't necessarily take those vein densities as plotted straight as a straight comparison to the other holes, because it's drilled at a different angle. It's drilled at a higher angle to the actual veins, which are close to vertical there. And so, as I mentioned before, then you get a lower density, a lower apparent density, although the grade could still potentially be the same.
Scott, I just looked at the clock on my camera over there and realized that we've been at this for more than an hour. So I'm just going to let you go. Is there something that I failed to bring up, but you had hoped that we would talk about here today?
No, I think that was a great discussion. I'm sure there are many things I'd love to keep talking about, but it's probably for the best that you clamp it shut here, and we can go from there.
This is an interesting story to follow, even if I never end up getting the right time to buy or whatever. I will keep following this week just because it's just interesting. So yeah, I think as long as you're willing, I'm definitely willing to have a second discussion. So yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks for investing in time on me, and let's pick this up next time when you have more news.
Absolutely. Thank you, Antonio. Really appreciate it. And thanks for having me on.